The Atheist Debates Patreon Project presents the debate review versus Muslim apologist Daniel Haqiqatjou, Part 3, which is, of course, Part 2 of the actual debate. This is Part 3 of the debate review. Thanks for tuning in. I did Part 1 covering kind of like the pre-debate setup and an incident that takes place during the final segment of this debate, as well as a little bit about the structure. And then I did a Part 2 of the review for Part 1 of the debate. Part 1 of the debate was the first hour. For those who aren't aware, this debate was set up over 3 hours with Daniel picking the topics. Is there good evidence for God as the first one? Is there any religion more compelling than Islam as the second hour? And the third one gets into secular humanism and Islam and which one's potentially better for the world. This is going to be a much shorter segment than the last one. The last one was a 2-hour video, a little over 2 hours actually, that covered the first hour of the debate because there's a lot of content there. And I fully expect that the debate, that the video covering the final hour of the debate will also be about 2 hours. But I think I'm going to have to hold off on that. It's just too much to do to put out that many hours of content in a short period of time. This one's going to be significantly shorter, and I'm not going to put up video from the debate. There will be a link in the description so you can go check out the debate. This part of the debate was, I started my opening by just flat out saying that this was a silly subject that was a waste of time. And I stand by that. Which religion is more compelling than Islam is completely irrelevant. That's like saying which racist is more offensive than Jim Bob. It doesn't tell you anything about which one should be most compelling. It doesn't tell you anything about how compelling one is versus another. And in my opening, I specifically went to the dictionary to make sure that I didn't overlook some aspect of whether or not something's compelling. That's interesting. So I'm on, I've spoken many times about how the dictionary isn't prescriptive. It doesn't tell you what words mean. It describes how words are used. And so going to the dictionary for something like this is very useful because it can tell you, here's the different ways that people reasonably use the word compelling. And so when you go to the dictionary, one of the usages is it evokes interest, attention, or admiration in a powerfully irresistible way. Another one is that it's not able to be refuted and inspires conviction. And then, it's not able to be resisted. Inspiring conviction, can't be refuted. All of these things are descriptions of how we would normally use compelling. Oh, I find that very compelling. Then there were other usages of compelling that I wanted to address, like whether or not the religion itself compels you to do things. And on that footing, I mentioned that Islam may be the most compelling in its demands about its adherents and what they must do and how you got to pray multiple times a day and you got to, make a trip to Mecca and face this and do this. And it may be more compelling in that sense. But going with what we generally mean, which one contains the most compelling aspects? I'm using compelling to define it, but has inspired or converted the most or anything else. And so I was pointing out that Christianity is more popular. So on that front, it's definitely in second place. And that in third place is like secularism or non-theistic when you lump the whole group together, not secular humanism. That wouldn't be anywhere near the top on its own. But when you talk about it, it's still like 25% of the population. And instead of comparing, as Daniel wanted to, one religion to another, there's a fallacy involved in that, where it is you are comparing Islam to Christianity and Islam to Buddhism and Islam to blah, 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 and all these other different religious doctrines. But you have to compare it actually against all of them, because it's not so much that one other religion was more individually compelling than Islam, but all other religions and views about religions were more compelling than Islam was on its own. I mean, 75% of the people don't find Islam compelling. That's a significant majority. Similarly, when it comes to Christianity, they don't find Islam compelling. The members of each of the individual religions don't find it more compelling. There are a great many people, though, that do find Islam compelling, and that is not something you just get to wave off. When I did my opening and I pointed out why I thought it was silly and irrelevant, it's because what are you going to prove? If it turned out that 48% of the population were Muslim, so that nearly half of the people on the planet found this compelling, what would that tell you about the truth of the claims made? Nothing. It would tell you about the people. Whether or not something is compelling is about who's willing to accept it. This is why he brought up the compelling nature of Islam multiple times in the first hour of the debate. The entire second hour of the debate was about it being compelling. And the question was so poorly framed, which is, it doesn't matter whether you say, is Islam the most compelling religion, or is there any religion that's more compelling than Islam? In both of those, what your answer is doesn't give you any useful information. It doesn't tell you whether or not anything's true. It doesn't even tell you whether or not it's warranted belief. There could be a religion that is more individually, evidentiary warranted, and it wouldn't matter. Because if you are compelling people to be adherents to a religion by force, by birth, by shaming and ostracizing those who don't participate, the methods that are used to maintain, to gain and maintain adherence are relevant. In Islam, if you're born into this, you're not allowed to question. Daniel even noted in the first hour debate, he cannot doubt his worldview. It's not allowed. And so, at best, you can get to a point where a religion that is the most compelling might be the one that is least freeing, that is least warranted. You could invent a religion and require everyone to be an adherent to it on pain of death, which in some aspects, that's what Islam does. If I mock the Prophet, which we'll find out about in part 3 of the debate, I'm supposed to be put to death. Now, I went through the dictionary definitions. I listed the facts. I pointed it out that, secular is in third, that Islam is second. But all of that is about its popularity. And I mean popularity in the simple sense of how many adherents does it have, not the popularity in whether or not it has a good evidentiary warrant or whether or not it's a good religion, whether or not it's good for humanity, none of those things. It could be absolutely the most vile, prison system out there. And yet Daniel's trying to use it as if the fact that it is appealing to 25% of the planet means that there's something true there or something good there. And that is simply a fallacious argument, which is why I was saying from the outset, this is a silly waste of time, this entire second hour. We had some discussion. Nothing really got heated. I talked about, whether or not it's controlling. And then I talked about how and why secular humanism, I felt, should be more compelling. So there's a difference between what is most compelling and what should be more compelling. It should be more compelling to eat healthy than it is to eat candy. But that doesn't mean that people aren't going to love candy, and some people aren't going to love candy more. I mean, there's a reason I'm diabetic, and there's a lot of reasons that I'm diabetic, but I have a thing for sugar. Now, whether that comes from my brain and it's not my fault, or whether it comes from some failing of my character, or whether it comes from a physiological issue where I could eat sugar just like anybody else, but it impacts me differently, that doesn't really matter. If you want to talk about, How popular is type 2 diabetes? Well, there's a lot of people with it, but that doesn't mean that it's a good thing. And yet that's the implication. Daniel's entire view of this debate was that this is a debate about, is Islam true? It wasn't that. It was three different topics that he wanted to manipulate to suggest that Islam was true. And there's nothing about this second hour and how compelling things are that gets anywhere near whether or not Islam is true. In his opening, he pointed out that atheists have to pretend as if they're open to accepting a religion. No, that's not a requirement of atheism at all. But I'm happy to accept anything that can be demonstrated to be true. But he acknowledges that religions can't prove their claims scientifically, and that human beings find some things more naturally compelling via intuition, his theme for the entirety of this debate. But when he's also saying that atheists have to assume that claims that can't be proved scientifically are not compelling. He's changing how he's using the word compelling, because I would say that claims can't be proved scientifically should not be compelling. That's an ought issue. You should not be convinced by bad evidence. You should not be convinced by claims that don't have evidentiary support. That doesn't tell you at all about whether or not they are. And that was kind of the bait and switch that happened a couple times during this debate, the difference between what is compelling and what should be compelling. Because forced religion is in fact compelling, but it shouldn't be. Saying you were born into this religion, so you will be this religion, is in fact compelling, and so is we will kill you if you leave, or kill you if you mock it, or kill you if you doubt it. But those things should not be the way to compel someone to religion. Participating in any belief or accepting any belief should be an act not of volition, because there's not necessarily doxastic volunteerism, but should be an instantiation of freedom, that I have evaluated the claim and I have found the facts and data and the nature of this claim sufficient to warrant me becoming convinced that this claim is true or most likely true. And then I would become an adherent to this claim, which is true for anything. As I mentioned in the other debate review, there's nothing in there where there's a special set of criteria for gods or religions or anything else. You make a claim, you demonstrate it's true. He talked a little bit about natural intuitions and Occam's razor, which he got technically wrong, but there's no sense in digging in on it. The common usage of Occam's razor is to say the simplest explanation is preferred, but that's not what Occam's razor truly means. Occam's razor is you shouldn't multiply entities unnecessarily, but nobody really understands that. Well, no, I shouldn't say nobody. A lot of people don't really understand that it requires a lot more explaining than the simplest explanation should be preferred. But the simplest explanation, as I pointed out during the debate, is that people are really good at telling and making up stories, and people are really prone to believing things without good reason. And people are prone to being compelled to believe a religion and adhere to a religion, even if that religion can't meet its burden of proof. Atheists are a minority. And he tried to argue that because they're a minority, therefore most people believe in a creator. So that's the dominant belief, which demonstrates that creator-based beliefs are more compelling than a belief without a creator. This is why I keep pointing out that all I care about is whether or not it's true. Whether or not people become convinced of it is about how appealing the idea is. It's really appealing. Lottery tickets are incredibly appealing. There's a lot of people who buy a lot of lottery tickets. There's almost nobody who wins, which is how we get to $750 million jackpots and things like that. Is the lottery a good investment? No. Is there a point at which your expected return on investment becomes actually positive? Sure. When the lottery's way up in the hundreds of millions, your expected return on your dollar is, I don't know, a little over $1 mathematically. However, it doesn't change the odds that you are going to win. It just changes how much your investment might actually be worth. And that can be very compelling. But that doesn't mean it's a good thing. And it doesn't mean that it's a good way to use your dollar. there are many other ways your dollar could be used. And similarly with religions, there are many other ways that your time could be used, your energy could be used, the way you interact with other people, what you spend your time on. Religions have been preserved, but that does not prove the truth of the religion. This is a point, to Daniel's credit, that he made. He was pointing out that just because, merely because a religion has been preserved, that does not prove the truth of that religion. He also made the point that if religions change, that destroys their credibility. I can understand that, and I didn't really nitpick it at the time. I will say there are religions that for which it wouldn't be a problem if they changed. It's religions where you have the core belief is about a revealed absolute truth where the truth doesn't change. Therefore, if the religion changes, it was wrong about the truth to begin with, or it's wrong about it now. That I get. There are religions and potential religions where it is not about a revealed truth claim as much as it is a way of life. And so as it finds new methods that supposedly lead to a better life, that religion can change, and it wouldn't impact the credibility as long as at the foundation of that religion, change is an element that is acknowledged. Like, this religion will change as we learn more about stuff. It doesn't necessarily impact the credibility of all of them. But he also made the claim that miracles of the founders of religions, which are common in many of them, but not as uniform. He loves to suggest that things are nearly uniform or actually uniform or so near to actually uniform. That's just like every religion has this, and he's wrong about it every time, but or virtually every time. But he's right that a number of religions have miracles attributed to the founders, and he said that the reason for that is because it makes their claims more compelling. Now, if you could demonstrate the truth of these miracles, it might make some of their claims more compelling. The problem is that you don't need to demonstrate the proof of any of these because people are gullible, and merely a story of a miracle, if other people believe it, is enough for others to believe it, and that lends credibility, even though it shouldn't. The story is enough to give false credibility to the claims. And then he says, Muhammad performed many amazing acts that can be historically verified. And my brain immediately says, like what? What? Because you mentioned the word miracles, but you didn't include the word miracles with Muhammad. For Muhammad, he said many amazing acts that can be historically verified. So he starts with miracles of the founders, then goes to Muhammad did amazing things that are historically verified. And then he decides to list them. For example, he's widely considered to be the most influential man in history, even by non-Muslims. That's kind of true, but not necessarily the most, certainly among the most. And I'll get back to that in a moment. No person has turned more people to monotheism than Muhammad. That one, Daniel actually almost rebuts himself as well. Islam is the strongest and most robust religion in history and will soon have the greatest number of followers. All right, let's deal with those three, and then we'll move on to the if Muhammad had only converted 3 people claim that Daniel did. So first of all, that it is the strongest and most robust religion in history is dubious at best. Christianity is currently more popular, so you need to stop weaseling around with definitions and say exactly what do you mean by strongest and most robust. It's the strongest and most robust. You know, you can make claims like that advertising anything. It's the best chicken you'll ever eat. Okay, that's just not true. What is your criteria for strongest and most robust? But is it the second most popular religion now currently? Sure. But he also claimed it will soon have the greatest number of followers. How soon? How do you know that? When will it happen? And if it doesn't get to the greatest number of followers, will you then give it up? and admit that you were wrong? Or will you just keep striving because eventually you'll become, maybe not soon, maybe in a few hundred years it'll have the most number of followers. Maybe when all the other religions fall by the wayside due to scientific discoveries and a better education system, maybe Islam will be the last remaining religion. And so it'll have a few 100,000 subscribers while all the other religions have next to none because people have given up on irrationality and care about evidence. And then you can say, Islam is now the strongest and has the greatest number of followers, even though it has fewer followers than it does now. And even though the only reason that it persisted to maintain those followers is because it was killing the people who didn't want to stay. It's not in any way a testament to whether or not it's true. And when he says no person has turned more people to monotheism, okay, they want to dismiss Christianity as not monotheism, even though Daniel both says most Christians would view, or many or most Christians, I don't remember exactly which word he used, would view Christianity as monotheistic despite the notion of the Trinity and despite Catholic saints and all these other things. But he's going to view Islam as monotheistic, Judaism as potentially polytheistic or henotheistic as well, and Christianity as however they want to dismiss it. And so Muhammad has turned more people to monotheism. So what? If monotheism isn't true, then Muhammad has turned more people to a lie. That doesn't attest to the truth of it. And the other one was Muhammad is widely considered the most influential man in history. Well, if you do lists, like Google some lists, you'll find Jesus and Muhammad and Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. You'll find the list I'm looking at right now, the top 10 are Jesus, Muhammad, Siddhartha Gautama, Zarathustra, Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great, Confucius, Alexander Fleming, Constantine the Great, and Johannes Gutenberg. Now, if those are your top 10 most influential people in all of history, then explain the miracle of Johannes Gutenberg or Constantine the Great or Confucius or Alexander the Great, or why your guy is number 2. If you look at another list, you find that it's Jesus, Napoleon, Muhammad, Shakespeare, Lincoln, Washington, Hitler. Do we really, does that mean that Hitler was on to something good because he's in the top 10 on this list of most influential people? I don't put any stock in ChatGPT. It's not, it's not a reliable source. It's not necessarily a reliable source, and it's not properly an AI. But as a predictive text, it's going to be often a good indicator of how many people would answer this sort of question, or what would be the most popular sort of answer. If you ask ChatGPT the 50 most influential people in history, Jesus is number 1, Muhammad is number 2, Isaac Newton's 3, Einstein's 4, Gandhi's 5, Martin Luther's 6, Abraham Lincoln is 7, Washington's 8, Napoleon's 9, and Julius Caesar's 10. None of these actually matter. We can look at any number of lists of that. Let's just cut Daniel some slack when he says that, Muhammad is widely considered to be the most significant person in history. And we'll just say it's virtually undeniable that Muhammad is widely considered to be one of a handful of the most influential people in history. And that has to be the case as long as he's the founder of the second most popular religion on the planet. So what? That doesn't tell you anything at all about whether or not the claims and stories about him are true, or whether there's any truth there at all. Daniel said if Muhammad had only converted 3 people, then Islam would be less compelling. No. If he'd only converted 3 people, then it was already less compelling. He compelled 3 people. That's how compelling works. See, this is one of the many times where Daniel kind of switches how he's using compelling. A difference between what is compelling and what ought to be compelling, because he's just using the same word for both. But in those cases, if Muhammad only converted 3 people, then Muhammad's religion, we would know about it, and it would have obviously been less compelling than it was. But the fact that it was more compelling doesn't tell you anything about whether it's true, and it doesn't tell you anything about the methods and mechanisms by which it compelled people. But all of this is just a fallacy, an argumentum ad populum fallacy, for you to directly state or suggest that the truth of a religion is tied in any way to how many adherents it has and how convinced they are and how passionate they are and how likely they are to die in its name or kill in its name is patently absurd. You just don't understand logical fallacies. He said, all of these things make Islam more compelling. No, they don't make Islam more compelling in and of themselves. They demonstrate how it is compelling. Now, it's true that if you convince 42% of the population, you're now going to be able to use that to say, hey, look, we got 42% of the population. Come on. And you can use bandwagon, a propaganda technique that is also fallacious, to boost that to 45 or 50 or 57 or 82 or 96%. And none of that tells you whether or not it's true. And that's why I was saying that part two, our number two of the debate, was silly and a waste of time. There's nothing about the popularity of an idea that has any bearing on whether or not it's true. And Daniel and I talked about different ways in which things are compelling and what it means and what it doesn't mean. And all it was an admission on his part that, once again, the reason he didn't present evidence for God in the first hour is because he can't present evidence for God that is actually evidence for. All he can present are the claims, the intuitive claims of that. And that as long as we're in a world where the atheist paradigm of requiring, observational, empirical evidence for claims, then religion's just never going to be able to do that. Well, cool. I don't know how it's never going to be able to do it, but thanks for the admission. And at the end of the day, the popularity of the idea isn't a measure of how true it is or how likely to be true it is. As a matter of fact, in some cases, the impact of an individual is about how much harm and damage they've done to the world. And while I wouldn't necessarily say which religion's founder has done the most harm to the world, Muhammad's definitely up there. Let's see you next time. Bye-bye.